Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to finish off taking this crank out of the engine block, and my friend Will's going to come over and I'm going to show him a few measurement things that we're going to do. So let's get started on that. In the last video, as you know, we took out the harmonic balancer and the pulley. I measure the end float of the crank before I take it out, and it's really just out of interest really, because obviously we're replacing all the bearings anyway, but I want to know what our baseline was. So I've got a dial gauge at the end, right on the tip here, zeroed out. Basically I'm inserting the screwdriver, the flat blade screw, between one of the bearing caps and one of the crank webs, or the counterweights, okay? So we've got the crank all the way towards the back, and I'll pull in on the dial closer in a second. But all we do is move the crank. Let me move it from here, move it forward. Okay, you can see the crank moving just ever so slightly. So let's put it back to the zero mark. Where are we? Right, that's zeroed out. Make sure. And you try and keep it dead on. You don't want it too much of an angle, like say like this. You know, you want it straight on like that. Right, and now I'm going to move the crank. So what does that read there, Will? So 0 to...
We are at 10,
16?
11, 12, 13, 14, about 15 3/4.
So nearly 16 thousandths of an inch play in the crank.
That's thousandths of an inch.
Yeah,
okay.
Thousandths of an inch on this. And so that, I haven't looked up at the manual yet. I will try and find that before the end of this video and give you what it's supposed to be.
So if you are outside of your allotment on what is allowed for play,
yeah,
how do you fix it?
Right, so underneath these caps, right,
yeah,
are shells, okay, yeah, bearing shells. I've got a couple of the ones, these things,
okay,
right,
yeah.
These are for the big ends of the crank, the rods, okay, yeah. They're bigger obviously inside here, okay, two halves, but this center one on the whole crank has got shoulders, yep, okay, that rub against the shoulders of these webs, okay? Okay. And so they're obviously worn. Okay. So that's a certain thickness. I think certain companies provide thrust bearings, that's what they're called, thrust bearings with different thicknesses, okay, to take up that play.
Okay.
Right? But I've got to find out about that. When I get these out, I'm going to measure these thrust bearings.
Do these all have, I mean, these are all the same thickness thrust bearings?
No, there's only one thrust bearing.
Oh, okay.
All of the others are just regular.
Ah, got you.
From my understanding, that's what they are. And this one is normally on these is in the center. Some cars, okay, I think Chevy, they put them at the end.
Okay, my next question was going to be, depending on the size of your gap, do you split the difference on your thrust bearings, but you only have one, so that explains that.
You just buy, let's say it's
like
like 4,000 or something, or a 6,000th one, or whatever. You have to put the correct one in. We know we're at basically 16 thousandths out, right? Depending on what the manual says, then we know how worn we are. And the reason this is worn is because we determined that this oil in this motor was diluted by fuel.
Oh.
And you know about that, don't you?
Yeah, okay.
Right, there we are. So let's get this guy off the front here. Not torqued in very hard.
That one looks stripped.
No, it's not that. It's just I'm very careful. If there's any gunk at the bottom of them,
you don't do it.
I pick it out with a dental pick. I say to Will, we got some crud on the bottom of these that stops the Allen socket going deep, and then you risk then rounding it off. So let's get those clean.
How did that work? How did that work, by the way?
They filled up with junk. Moved. There we go. So this is the front seal cover. Get that off straight. It's really machine tough. Oops. So there's the spring. Okay. So this is the tension spring for the pump chain. So maybe you can buy a replacement one of that. I don't know, actually. I'll have to look into that. And there's obviously the seal, the main front crank seal there, just put into the housing. That's all pretty straightforward. just go there, and then we'll undo that front nut. There we go. Should get the chain on. Certainly going to be changing this chain out for a new one, because as I was saying to Will, this is deep in the heart of the motor here, and we'll inspect the gears obviously. Take that guy out. You imagine this is bathed in a lot of oil down here, so I wouldn't have expected too much wear on that. Anyway, let's get that out of the way. And the chain. Original chain, no master link or anything, but I don't know that these had master links, probably not, because they're fairly straightforward to put on once you're in here. So, right, I'll back that up. And next thing, we'll get the oil pump off. Straightforward little unit. Okay, get that all bagged up. Just for notations, much longer bolt on the on this side. Before we flip it over and take the end cap off the other end, there is another chain guide right here. Right side, I'm going to remove that guide, and I'm making note of that because these guides are dotted around this casework. Obviously we'll refer to the manual, but we've got to get that one out, because that's not going to stay in there when it goes to the machine shop. So let's get our little removal tool and get that out. So another metal guide here, a little chewed up on the end there, but generally in pretty good shape, and that's a shorty guy, which sits like so on the other side, and it's not broken, it's just short. Obviously it can't be that long because it'd run into the chain, so that goes like that. So we're at the back of the engine now. I've undone these two Allen bolts here. A little tricky here because of the casing, so I used a slightly shorter one, or you might want to cut yours down a little bit. That might be easier, so then you can get a wrench in there. Alright, next thing we do, taking those two bolts out, we're going to start loosening the main caps now. I'm going to work from the inside out, loosen them all kind of together really. Make sure we've got enough leverage here. Now, all these caps are marked from front to back. Where is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then there's these serial numbers here that will probably correspond to the receiving cap on the block. And these bolts I'll obviously be checking for their tolerances and all that good stuff. There we go. Come here. Well, that one looks pretty decent. That journal, as you can see, zoom in on that. This is the first bearing I've taken out. You can see some lines there. There's definitely some scoring there. But thankfully, I'm finding, spin this guy around, no scoring on that journal whatsoever. Yeah, yeah, there's definitely a ridge on that bearing there. You can hear it. but thankfully hasn't transferred any damage to the journal. So just as a note, we've got a serial number 3439 on this bearing cap, and also it's stamped on the casing of the block as well, 3439. Number 5 cap. Oh yeah, this is taking a hiding, this one. See, look at that. Again, really scored up bearing. And again, a good journal though. No scratching on the journal. That's amazing, really. I mean, journal looks good, no scoring. Bearing looks crappy. Number 2, bottom bearing of the main on number 2. This is the one with the chain guard on it. It's kind of a guide plate. Okay, this is number 1 with the front where the chain runs, just here. The thrust main bearing. So, here are the shoulders that we were talking about. Okay, these are the shoulders, and this is what controls the forward and aft movement of the crank. And there's a little discoloration on these leading faces here. It might be just the material. I'll defer to you guys there that have been in here before. I'm assuming these slots are for lubrication, you know, to freely get a lot of lubricant in the surfaces here, you see. So again, we've got some little scoring on the faces here at the bottom there. The crank looks beautiful, and that is a huge bonus, as I'm sure you know why. Right, it's the next day now. I wanted to pull this end cap to remove the crankshaft here. There's 2 bolts at the bottom on the other, well, on the top, on the other side of this. And all I did, I got a piece of steel, welded a 3/8 nut here, and then used the original bolts to bolt through to that plate. And then this upper pulling plate, these are actually deep-throated sockets, okay? So that gives me a platform, bolted these metric M6s, I think. Can't think of the pitch right off the top of my head. 1.00, I think. Anyway, so then drilled a hole. Very simple design. And then I've got threaded rod again, the trusted threaded rod. Welded a nut on the top of that, so I can cinch it in. So you get the. And this could be used in a reverse way as well, where the nut's on the other side, where it pushes the plate in as well. So it works both ways. So this bolts into the bottom one, you see. First time I've used it, so hopefully this will pull that cut directly up, or end plate, or whatever you call it. Right, this should, now it's cinched into there, and all I'm going to do is start rotating this, and hopefully this should be able to pull that lower plate out straight up, you see, without stressing anything. Appears to be working nice. So there's no real way of getting any good leverage on it, so I thought about this last night. There you go, that works nice. Whoops, a daisy. Again, all this line around the shop, and just a few bucks at the hardware store. You have to have enough height to be able to lift the whole thing. Hopefully I've left enough. Yeah, that seems like it worked alright, doesn't it? Okay, so we'll just undo these. Like I say, it can be used to push putting the nut on the other way, and then it will just push it directly down, you see. Nice controlled manner. Okay, just sockets. Take the tool off of here. There you go, just a simple plate. Lift that sucker up. Here's the rear main seal, okay? You can see it's lifted on one side an amount and down on the other side, so they're kind of slightly offset, and the mirror image is down on the yoke inside there. So just pins, obviously keep all this together. Here's where the rear main seal is in this unit here, and this is the rear number 5 journal on the main journal on the crank. Okay, now that we've removed that back main seal at the back, that little gate assembly there, before we take the crank out, I want to do one last measurement, and that's measuring that the crank is not got any kind of throw on it. And so what I'm going to do, put the dial gauge on the center journal and see what, if there is any movement in there, detectable movement. Again, I've yet to look up on the manual and see what the tolerances are. So let's get the dial gauge set up on the center one, and we might take a few measurements, maybe on the rear and the other bearing here. So let's take a look. So what I'm going to do, I'll set the magnetic base off to the side here, and what I thought I would do is set this up on this center journal here where the thrust bearing is. So let's try and get that set up there. Obviously we've got to watch the oiling hole, you don't want it in line with that. Let's see. Okay, a little fiddly, but I've got that zeroed in there. And so what we've got to do now is just turn the crank. I'll just do it by hand, I guess. Okay, so that will run along the surface of the journal, and look at that, it's basically not moving. So that's quite amazing, really, in my book. As you can see, being very careful not to rock and roll it, rock the stand, but you can see as I move the crank, right, and you can see how sensitive this thing is. So that's quite amazing. That, let me just do that again. We've definitely got contact, and that is rolling around on that center journal, and it's picking up essentially no imperfections whatsoever. So you can see this line is obviously the oiling channel here, but you can see that it's got kind of, it looks like stuff is impregnated onto the bearing, and from my understanding this material will do that. If something's got in there, it's going to go into the bearing before it's going to go into the journal, and it hasn't got so bad that it's damaged the journal. So I think with everything that's going on with this block so far, that we've caught it just in time. 100.0504 I believe it is, if I can see correctly, and I'm assuming because of the sizing on the crank journals that this is standard, but I'll obviously mic out the crank to see if that they're all consistent. Obviously by our dial gauge it looks like they are. So I'm just going to, this is a 75mm anvil that's precision ground, and this will enable me to zero out the micrometer. Let that knurl do its job, and I'll just check that let me lock that, is in 0. which it's not. So this is not on 0. So right, we've zeroed it out to the line now. I'm not sure that you can see that, but anyway, it is. And we've got the wrong mic. Hold on a minute. It's the one smaller one. I'll zero this out and then we'll get back to you. Hold on. Right, okay, got the right one now. It's the 50 to 75 mil. And we've got to roll this, take the lock off. We've got to roll this all the way out. That's better. A little tricky to find that center point, because if you go too far and you crank down, then you can't pull back. You want to try and find where it's just that little slight drag with the what are we here now? Okay, we are at 70, looks like 70.44 mil. I'm going to check the catalogue and see what the standard bearing shells are, and then we'll know whether we're standard or this crank needs any kind of work done to it, but I doubt it compared to going by what we've found already. So, right, one other little test I've done, I've remounted the crankshaft and I've removed the center 3 bearings, okay, and left the 2 end ones in and oiled it and everything. So essentially the 3 center bearings are floating, so that should really detect any deviation off of this 0. I've marked it at, well, it's pretty much on 0. We're just trying to make sure we can detect any movement. So let's just do the same thing again as we did yesterday, and that is riding solid on that journal, completely free, completely not moving. It's like setting the crank on a two V blocks at each end, and I thought I better do this just to, otherwise it'll just bug me. But that's amazing. So crank seems to be in fantastic shape. And just so you see, you can hear it hitting the journal. There you go. Well, I think that's it for this video. It's started to get a little bit long. In the next one I'll probably break down the oil pump, and I'll probably just go about cleaning this. I don't have to film that, do I? So clean this, make sure we've got everything off that we need to get off, and then schedule an appointment with the machine shop so we can inspect it and see what next step we need to do. So I really appreciate you watching. It was nice to have Will here earlier, and please hit like, share, subscribe, and come and visit us on the Facebook group Mercedes Maintenance and Mercedes Rescue, and I will see you in the next one. Take care guys, have a good one, bye bye. Look at that. What are you laughing at? Don't laugh. This. No, but I've got... Okay, you ready? Here's